I'm learning by writing, which is something people need to think about, that I'm exploring these thoughts. I mean, I worry about that all the time. I think about like, who am I to say these things? I kind of see myself as like an on second thought leader. Like on second thought, that's my thing, right? Like anyone can do that. For me, the writing thing is like an exploration and a journey, but it doesn't need to be like that for everyone. Like they might want to get really deep into a topic and write about it. I do think that writing is learning, writing is learning and exploring a particular idea. And I think that people feel like this high bar to do it when really the bar is being curious about something enough to throw yourself into it for a bit.
Hi, I'm Karl.
And I'm Danielle.
And this is Productly Speaking.
We're product managers by trade, and here we explore the world of product management, its people, and their stories.
We promise to keep it entertaining, and maybe you'll learn something. Shall we give this a go?
Let's do it.
On today's episode, we are going
let's just get into it.
Oh, okay.
We had an icebreaker at work today asking, trying to get the product managers and the engineering managers, more friendly with each other because we're all remote and haven't physically met before. And the icebreaker question was, you have 0 time to prepare and you have to give a 20-minute presentation. What do you choose to talk about? And most people pick, interesting topics. Like one guy is struggling with his house flooding. And so he's like, I would talk about flooding mechanisms and how to stop it. Somebody else is training for a marathon. So I would talk about running shoes. And I'm like, I would talk about product management. And they were all laughing. And they were like, well, you grocery shop. Surely you could talk about grocery shopping and then it's not work related. And I'm like, everything comes back to product management. I look at an egg timer, for example, and think, how could that be an app or something that just works better for the problem I'm trying to fix? I can't go grocery shopping without thinking about it. You can use the approach
to many things. Yeah,
right.
That's the thing.
That's the problem, but that's also the joy.
John Cutler started as a game developer working on a game called Last Call, a mass-market CD ROM bartending game. He then went on to produce sales and marketing presentations at Nickelodeon for MTV, Nickelodeon, Bravo, Comedy Central, and Major League Baseball. His journey into product management started at RichFX, and since then he's ventured into consulting, writing, and most recently has held the title of Senior Director Product Enablement at Toast. John's blog, The Beautiful Mess, has been going for just over 4 years and is a highly regarded product manager resource. I know both myself and Danielle have spent many hours discussing articles written by John, and so we are very excited to introduce to Productly Speaking, Mr. John Cutler.
Great. Thanks for having me. The intro was good. I was living in New York as a musician, did this game thing, and was very eclectic in my interests for a long time. What will help most people get my background is probably settled into this series of B2B SaaS companies, and most notably at a company called Amplitude, where I would interact with companies from around the world. And lots of them. And that was probably really informed my writing, inspired my writing, did some UX research in there, product management, and then this weird product evangelist role at Amplitude, and then onto an internal role at Toast. That's a bit about me, eclectic start in product, and then settled into B2B SaaS with some product management and UX roles.
Excellent. Game development in a lot of ways is product management without the title, especially when you're the lead over the thing. It's you've got to product manage a game. At least I think you do. Tell us a little bit about your experience building Last Call and how that helped you get from, game developer into product management.
I dropped out of school. It always kind of starts with something funny like that. I mean, I had dropped out of school, but that wasn't really the thing. I was living in New York at the time, and I think I probably wanted to get a job. And I said, how do you get a job as a bartender? And then I realized you had to go to these weird schools that you could find little classified ads at the back of the newspaper or whatever called bartending schools. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if there was this video game and you could learn how to tend bar and then you could do it. This was early 2000s. Yeah, even 1999 or 98. I mean, this was you shipped things on CD ROMs. Yep. It's crazy, as naive and as quaint as that sounds. You would ship things on these things. So I was young, and then I was really young, and I just got excited and enamored with this idea. I remember getting a credit card, which is a dangerous thing to give someone in their early 20s, and marching out to you would get your computer at sort of a Sears or something like that. So yeah. I remember marching out and getting a compact computer. This is going to be it. I'm going to have this video game. It turned out to be way, way harder than I thought. And luckily I met a couple people who really, really helped along the way, and we get it started and we got this thing going. A friend who gave me just a little bit of money, which helped out a lot in doing this. And yeah, we sort of evolved this game. Some of the funnier things about it is that actually there's a star-studded cast of characters in Last Call. So there was all these people in New York and comedians and other people we somehow roped into doing voices for this. Unfortunately, that meant that the game was absolutely not safe for work. And it got banned. Not banned, but the game, like the Walmart, who said they were going to buy it and distribute it, decided not to.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the time it felt like, well, they sell guns, but like, why can't they sell this game? It really was kind of over the top. You had to 10 bar for these 20 customers. Then you would like reach Bacchus, the god of wine, at the end. And it was just, it was out there. There's like a S&M couple and the nurse. And then there was this hedgehog that came into the bar and astrophysicist named Smooth. So it was just over the top, but it was a really, really, really fun experience working with just super talented people, animators, learning how to make this game. And it was hard to do. And then they couldn't distribute it. So luckily at the time I negotiated, because they didn't think it was a good idea, negotiated the ability to sell my game myself directly from a website. And they thought, well, how quaint. No one's going to buy that. They're going to just buy it in stores. That turned out to be a good decision because we were able to recoup some of the money back from doing that. So that was this whole adventure with making stuff with people. It was fun.
Very cool. So then you went on to work at Nickelodeon, and that kind of sounds like a dream job, especially at the time that you were going to do that, getting to tell stories. How did that then further help inform your move into product?
At the time, I was touring in a band and would come back into New York occasionally. It's funny, I did a string of these basically presentation gigs. And for sometimes at long periods of time, like Nickelodeon was one that I did for a couple of years, when they had these large presentations. And so it was sort of a quasi-freelance thing, but you come in when they would do these big presentations. But I also worked in a PowerPoint sweatshop, essentially at an investment bank. We would work the graveyard shift as musicians. It was mostly like musicians and actors and other people. And you'd go in to like Morgan Stanley at 10 p.m. at night and then work till 6 a.m. And this was during the .com boom, but that was actually before, around some overlapping time. And that was pretty fun too, because you got to just get deeply entrenched in business and reading all these presentations, and you had to use 2-point fonts sometimes. The goal was not for anyone to read this stuff. It was actually just shock and awe investment bank presentations. That was fun. But the Nickelodeon stuff was so interesting because I think I underestimate the degree to which it impacted how I view this part of the creative process. So you're sort of producing and putting together these big advertising upfronts that they would give. And the product is essentially something that the ad sales team or other people are going to use to get all the brands really, really excited for that year. And so buy ads and things. And so it really was kind of a product, and it was really difficult. And there was lots of stakeholders involved, and they'd all have all sorts of things. And every year it was a new theme to put together to do it. So although I would say probably my primary interest at the time was playing music, doing these, and they usually lasted about 3 to 6 months at a time for the different brands at different times. That was really, really interesting. And you learned a lot at the same time. So yeah, I was still pretty lost at that point. Like I hadn't like fully found tech and things. And then slowly I started to get these more sort of tech oriented jobs and PM jobs and things.
Did you get to meet Kenan Thompson as part of that?
No,
I
didn't.
Disappointing.
That's funny.
Carl's been really keen to ask you that question.
No, I didn't.
You've mentioned Amplitude and how that's inspired your writing and gave you kind of that journey into design and PM. Your blog, The Beautiful Mess, is something that both Karl and I have been receiving to our inboxes for over a year at this point, and we spend a lot of time talking about it, as you mentioned in the intro. How did you get started writing The Beautiful Mess?
It starts in 2015. Beautiful Mess is actually only about a third of my writing. I have more articles not in The Beautiful Mess than in The Beautiful Mess. So I have cuddle.fish. It's all the old posts. And so that started in about 2015. And so Beautiful Mess was maybe 2019 or 2020. And so I have a good 5 years of writing before then. And basically I figured it out the other day. I've written a post every 5.2 days since 2015. Wow. So The Beautiful Mess was sort of the culmination of just a writing habit, and it predated Amplitude, and it probably actually helped get that job, that prior blog. And I would write this post like 12 signs you're working in a feature factory. And I was an OG product clickbait content creator before the space was dominated by other people. Yeah, I was really active on Twitter there, and I was sharing these images and drawings and stuff. I used to do that a lot. It's a writing habit that started earlier. Actually, I was working in a company in Raleigh at the time called Pendo, and I was there sort of were doing this bi-coastal thing with my partner, Sharon, and I had a lot of time on my hands. So I would just go to a coffee shop in Raleigh and just sort of start cranking out these posts. And that's really where I started.
Which coffee shop in Raleigh?
It was called Raleigh Raw, I think.
Okay, yeah. Juice bar.
Yeah, and they had this coffee that had like buffalo milk in it or something like that, like buffalo oil or no, grass-fed beef something. And they put that in the coffee. It was very good and it helped writing. Well, something like that. Yeah, something. It's like a creamy addition to coffee. I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's supposed to like help you get more energy or something. There's a whole...
Oh, it worked. Yeah, that started my writing career. Yeah, to do those things. The Amplitude stuff definitely deepened the awareness of a bunch of other companies, though, because I was meeting with new companies all the time. And that gave me a lot of inspiration as well.
Very cool. So how much do you know about your audience, your reading audience? Are they all product managers seeking to learn, or do you have people from a variety of different disciplines?
It's a variety of different disciplines, and it's a variety of different types of people. It's one thing I've learned a lot in product and writing. It's like any company, like you can have an overlap of people who want to use sticky notes, like for example, in Miro. It doesn't mean all of them are using it for the same thing or the same types of people, I mean, my stuff tends to be a little bit more introspective. I don't do actionable. That's not my thing. I'm not actionable in a lot of the posts. I mean, I think some of them I do, and I'm like, oh, I have this framework. Although I've developed a number of interesting frameworks over the years, or at least helped teach them, it's not something I write about all the time. So I think it tends to be pretty cross-disciplinary with a fair amount of engineering managers and leaders and design leaders. And it seems like what's in common with folks is a desire to go like one or two layers deeper into the patterns that they see at their work or with their products. I asked on LinkedIn once, what's Cutler as a service? Like, what job to be done am I doing? Or like, what's that thing? And then I think a couple people said, making us think or something. So that's the beautiful mess was definitely about leaning into this idea that it's this just messy reality that we have to tackle. And there's no clear, simple answers for most things. I think that's the audience. It's tough because that could bring in a lot of diverse people as well.
So how have your interactions with readers shaped your product career?
It's going to sound basic, I guess, but like they remind me that there's other people out there like me. I mean, that was the thing is I was sort of writing and then I was learning more and more people would reach out and say, well, that resonated. And then I start talking to them more. It's given me awareness that there's a large diversity of folks that we're working with. And one thing I've been thinking a lot about too, that definitely the writing has helped with is we tend to think about, I don't know if you've ever taken those personality tests where someone says, are you strategic or do you collaborate or do you do these things? And I think one thing that the writing has helped me with is you can have people who are collaborative, but who have different views on work and worldviews and professional views who treat that very differently. Someone from Silicon Valley, when you say collaborate, is going to view that maybe in a different way than someone from, Denmark or something. They're just going to view it in different ways. So I think if anything, the writing and interacting with readers has reminded me over and over that you're dealing with a pretty diverse bunch, not just in terms of work styles, but you're dealing with a pretty diverse bunch and just in terms of worldviews and views on how to get things done, that kind of stuff. So that's where I think I've expanded the most in interactions with readers.
You mentioned that you started The Beautiful Mess in 2019, but you've been writing much longer than that. What have your employers along the way thought of the blog? Has it helped your career path?
They hate it.
Oh, really? Wow.
No, I mean, there's always been this tension because, I tell this joke a lot because I think it's just funny is that I think I remember Spencer from Amplitude was like, why did you write that? And I had to remind him that his problems were not unique. That like someone else had that exact problem. And so, it's always been a little tenuous. But then again, at my latest job at Toast, I think it was great because I would get messages like, thank you so much for doing that writing. I know it's outside of work. I know it's not really related to us, but it resonated on some level. So it's definitely a balancing act. I wish there was a way to solve this problem. Like there should be a product out there to do it because I think this relationship people have with their current employer causes a lot of people to share overly generic things. And maybe I fall into this trap where they don't feel like they can talk about specifics unless their company happens to be a company that welcomes people talking about specifics. And what that means is we have this sort of Instagram version of product management. I was talking to someone recently and they just were laughing. They're like, you should just see what it's like the inside of this place. And so I think that one thing that does is, this tightrope walk that I have to balance sometimes with my writing is probably something other people have to balance in how they communicate about work. But I think ultimately it means we don't get as many real world stories. And you have to use words like companies that, or in some companies, or often. And I get it. I understand why people do that, but it also means that we don't hear as much about what's actually happening in companies because people need to balance that in their work.
Yeah, we've noticed that just reading some of the big stories out of product leaders and people that are big in the space. They'll tell a great story and you come away from it and you're like, that was really interesting. But at the end of the day, there's no way the story was the entire story or that it completely represented reality.
You almost need multiple people to tell the story for that, which is the main thing.
Having worked in Silicon Valley for a few years and really seeing how before I moved to California, so many of these companies, you mentioned them, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, they're all called out as leaders in their space for product management. And then you start working for one of them and you think, well, actually the 6-pager only works in a very specific use case or in a very specific way. When you're then at a startup being a product manager thinking, yeah, I can do a 6-pager and everything's going to be perfect. And it just isn't.
It's interesting how we process that because I think success maybe is a function of context across multiple dimensions, like context across aptitude and experience and competencies and things like that. And then the tools we use of which frameworks are a tool. They're just one tool in the tool belt, right? And then across our practices and behaviors, and then across our environment and how it's shaped, and then across the beliefs and norms of a particular company. And all of that then has this sort of contextual pivot to all those things. So context across many factors, across the stage of the company, where the company's located, where the employees, and all of those all things are intertwined, right? You need competencies to use certain tools, but tools let you do certain things. And we shape our environment and our environment shapes us, and on and on. And it's something I'm very, very interested in. But I think the meta discussion there, if you were to call it that, is we have a hard time just teasing that out for anything. You're in this environment, you're doing it, and it's kind of hard to distinguish between what a skill is and a tool. And it's hard to distinguish between sometimes what an environment does to the people in it and then how people shape it. So I think that it's a fascinating topic. I think for a lot of people, it's pretty tough out there in some ways. It's a challenging environment in some sense. People want certainty and simplicity at the moment. They want someone to say, that's good, that's bad. It is very contextual.
So our experience is that many career ladders for PMs require that you prove that you have your craft nailed and especially externally, whether that be podcasts or blogs or showing up at meetups and giving presentations. Like you get internally rewarded with promotions when you're seen to be doing things externally. We've already talked about how that can be problematic, but as a subject, how do you feel about that in terms of career progression? And is that relevant proof that you're growing your skill?
As someone who's worked with managers to put together a career ladder for PMs, I think that there's a tendency to fall into some traps. And one of the traps is basically someone will say they need to have impact. And then they'll say, well, what kind of impact? And then the first person will say, well, they need to impact the people around them. And then another person in the room will say, well, they need to impact the community. And then the next person will say, well, they've got to impact the product and we're going to have outcomes. And then they end up with like a fairly sort of overgeneralized model. And it just ends up in a career ladder. And then without people really giving it any critical thought, they're returning to that career ladder all the time. And it makes sense. It's the same thing when people come up with maturity models. Like most maturity models in the world are not well thought through. They get a couple of people who've done something and they say, what does terrible look like? And they put that on the left and number 1. And then like, what does amazing look like? And they put that all the right, number 5. And then someone's like, well, let's just extrapolate everything in between and let's just come up with a couple dimensions and do it. My first response when you said that is it just feels like lazy career job design.
Yeah.
Frankly. And I mean that because there are amazing PMs who choose not to have a life and engage in their work and do an amazing job. And then there's people who are outwardly focused in the company, but do that on the company's dime when they should be getting some work done. Right? When I see these folks, and sometimes I've been included in this, kind of on LinkedIn with some great thought leadership or whatever, I have to ask, and I would ask myself, like, are you getting your job done? And I'm sure people ask that about me in the company. So I tend to advocate for more nuanced things. Like I think that if someone, especially if you're at a company that doesn't sell anything related to the product community, your best reason to engage in the product community is probably to create an environment where you can hire people and then also keep your own skills up to date. So I think that I can understand the rationale behind it, but I'm always a little skeptical with job ladders that take a very biased view to what success looks like. But that's just me.
I think you've triggered a thought there of saying on a job description that you have to have external impact loses the problem that you're trying to solve for. Are you trying to solve for hiring? Are you trying to solve for skills gap closing?
Yeah. And I think, that's like so many things in product. Look, how funny is it? Product managers talk all the time about iteration and learning and research and blah and empathy and this and that and all these things. And then they don't turn any of that to their internal things that they do. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, let's go deep down the rabbit hole around this. And then how are we going to do career ladder? Blah, 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 blah. Like they don't ask what's the job to be done here? Like what's the why before doing it? So it's just designers too. I mean, it's all like we're all hypocrites in that level.
So when you started to work on establishing yourself in the product industry, through your writing and through your thought leadership on places like LinkedIn, et cetera, did you come up against any resistance in the community?
No, sometimes you have just resistance based on people just not liking. There's some people who just want actionable things, and that's the only the resistance is the market, I guess, because some people don't want that stuff. Frankly, that's also a fair amount of privilege involved with that, and it's also starting really early in this. I can't imagine right now in the sort of narrative soup that's going on and all these content creators and all these canvases and everyone like plugging into AI anything and writing all this stuff. What would someone who had a genuine message do to cut through all that noise? And so I don't worry as much for me. It's what I do, and I have a really good head start for doing it. But even then, like LinkedIn algorithm is terrible. This thing is just like, it's almost doom scrolling. Like LinkedIn's the new doom scrolling. It's either people have lost their job or they're pitching some stupid framework or whatever. And I think that there's work to be done there to get genuine voices. I think also the pandemic, at a certain point, it overdosed us on talks and content coming in from the community. There were a lot of vendors in that space, of which I was with one, and everyone was getting a lot of talks going. And then it's sort of the tail end of the pandemic. Well, I still think it's going in some ways, some places, but I think people have become overloaded. But what I mean from that is I think someone trying to start doing what they're doing now and share this stuff in authentic wouldn't have anywhere near the easy time that I had with it when it was fairly greenfield that people were doing this on various platforms. So
that's just the typical challenge of trying to join an already crowded market and trying to stand out when you've got people that already have their preferred vendor of content that they're going to.
Well, and there's just a lot of money to be made with clickbait. There's a lot of money to be made with being divisive. And there's a lot of money made to sell people insecurity with a lot of this. And that makes it very, very, I'm sure it's always been like that, but it's a very crowded market. So it's supply and demand here. Remember too, so like I do think that if there weren't those things, people would find more authentic content in doing this. But there's a lot of incentives to have not very helpful content out there. On many levels. So I think that contributes as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And LinkedIn has definitely become a doom scroll of just seeing how many people have gotten laid off. Companies left and right are laying people off as they're recovering from basically pandemic overhiring and just also, wanting to get the books as clean as possible, especially if you're publicly traded, to get as much of an advantage as they can there.
It's also become a lot of people telling you who you should be and who you shouldn't be, and telling that things are dead or not dead. Imagine in these times, people are saying these people don't need to exist. And then they also use language like, I hate to break it to you, or this is going to be hard to hear. Who are these people that I'm passionate about this, but like who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to tell 100,000 people some hard news and expect that to be okay? But some people are like that. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't show a lot of empathy to people's situations. And so there's a lot of that too, which I don't like.
No, but in a lot of cases, that same person has the solution that they're ready to sell you a few days later.
Well, yeah.
Sometime.
Or right there in that post. That's the environment we're in, and it's unfortunate. But I also think there's opportunities for genuine interactions with people. And I think that's great.
Yeah, no, that is.
If you put your mind to it.
And so you've recently written a piece called Self-Gaslighting and the Doubt Loop, in which you talk about imposter syndrome without once mentioning that phrase. So congratulations on figuring out how to do that, because that's a pretty cool writer's trick. But you state in that article, at a certain point, you start to doubt your overall ability. Maybe I deserve this situation. Maybe anywhere that would hire me is like this. We stop asking whether having a different manager might help us be more successful, or if working at another company or on another team could be a better fit. We stop asking if we are genuinely fulfilled. We accept things as they are because we believe we're the problem or are incapable of dealing with the problem. Before you know it, your options are limited and your career narrative becomes a self-reinforcing loop of stagnation and self-doubt. You can get to the point where nothing feels real and you're self-gaslighting. That's a really powerful observation, and really that resonated a lot with me. It's one I think that we find ourselves wrestling with often in product management. To the people that find themselves in that situation, what would you recommend? And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the whole doom scroll of LinkedIn, because that can get you into that self-gaslighting spot too.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic area. As cliche as it sounds, awareness in trying to catch that stuff early is probably important. And this does tie into what we were talking about in the sense that there's a lot of, especially here in the United States, and people writing from in the United States or within Silicon Valley or in tech in the United States, it's almost like there's just this like leadership industrial complex. There's almost this insistence that it's this almost toxic stoicism. This weird, like, bite your lip, don't complain. It's just you. You can self-improve your way out of it all the time. At least for me, once I've started noticing that and noticing the effect it would have on me and the effect that it has on other people, there's always a way you can blame yourself for something.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of this dominant narrative is stop blaming other people. But I think that the problem is way tilted in the other direction. I think that people are often blaming themselves for these situations or blaming these things. So I think that awareness that you could be doing is the first thing. I think that the second thing is building a support network that maybe isn't just people at your work or people in your team, building people who can give you a perspective. And it really helps in that because you find people are in these situations at work saying, I could be a better communicator. I could better manage up or whatever. And then you talk to a friend and they're like, that is just certifiably toxic. And so you need a friend to remind you of those particular things. And I think the third thing, of course, I would have a third thing because you're supposed to speak in threes all the time. It's like the Holy Trinity. Is I think that there is a level of discovering what you really care about. And I think that often in people's careers, and especially in this space, it's so bombarded with people telling you what you should care about and telling you what amazing should look like and telling you all these things that I think sometimes we forget like what our place of happiness is, like what joy do we find in this particular thing and why are we doing it? And especially when you're really into product, it can sort of overwhelm your life. You finish work and you're just like, wow, I guess I could catch up on some of this cool stuff. And it tends to put so much of your self-identity is linked into a sort of more broad professional bucket than discovering what you like about it. It's okay to have fun doing this. It's okay to have fun. It doesn't need to be this big, Shakespearean drama all the time about it's hard and you won't like this and high agency and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't need to be like that if you don't want it to be like that. And so I think that that's important for people to remember.
I do think it's easy to lose yourself in the drama sometimes, and whether that's social media driven drama, whether that's workplace drama. I really appreciate the call out of having a support network or somebody that you can trust that sits outside of those bubbles to check you, I think can be super important. For the people that don't have that and maybe want to be that for themselves, I mean, I love the call out you've said that your blog is more about being introspective. You're almost checking yourself by writing and getting these thoughts out of your head to check yourself. How do you find new topics every week and the confidence to get out of your own way and be the subject matter expert that can talk on these things week after week?
Oh, that's hard. I mean, I'm learning by writing, which is something people need to think about, that I'm exploring these thoughts. I mean, I worry about that all the time. I think about like, who am I to say these things? I kind of see myself as like an on second thought leader. Like on second thought, that's my thing, right? Like anyone can do that. For me, the writing thing is like an exploration and a journey, but it doesn't need to be like that for everyone. Like they might want to get really deep into a topic and write about it. I do think that writing is learning, writing is learning and exploring a particular idea. And I think that people feel like this high bar to do it when really the bar is being curious about something enough to throw yourself into it for a bit. And that, I guess, has been how I've surmounted. See, now you got me thinking about it. I'm going to be nervous about it the next time I write. Write what you know, write what you've experienced, be authentic to your thoughts, caveat the stuff you've written. That's how kind of I do it. If I don't know a lot about something or it's new to me, I'm pretty open about that. Those are the things that come to mind when you're doing it. And if possible, figure out how to share real stories. Like if you can get to that point where it's like, this is how we solved a problem and this is what we did, and you can arrange that, it can be amazing. And in fact, I would say that that's something any company could do to even improve how they work. If you can get over the hurdle with the legal team about how to share things that you're working, it forces you to think about it. B, it helps with recruiting amazingly. People love companies that are willing to write about how they work and in ways that are authentic, not just so obviously massaged around what they're doing. And I think that from that perspective, the writing also helps you as a team. It's one thing to do a retro and say, oh, we don't communicate and let's just ignore that for the next 2 weeks. Writing and packaging your learnings can be really helpful. So maybe you could even find a community of folks internally who want to write, even if it's an internal blog. That could be a good way to start kind of getting the engine going with a group of people. Maybe it's a little easier to cross that hurdle than releasing stuff to the public for everyone.
You said that you write one article, or you've averaged one article every 5.2 days, and at this stage it's a habit. How long did it take you to build that habit, or did it just come super naturally to you?
I don't know, maybe 10 times. I don't know what it was like in the beginning. I mean, I think I just did a lot in the beginning. So then it just sort of started to work out like that. I definitely feel it. If it's been about 4 or 5 days, I start like, oh, I've got to get this post. Sometimes I write 2 of them in a week, and then I buy myself a little bit of time. I did do these funny things that anyone can do initially to get over some of the hurdles of writing. So there is a product called Flow State. I think it's called Flow State or Flow App, and you can find it on the Apple Store. I don't think it's been updated for years, but it was great. So basically you start writing, and if you stop writing, everything disappears. You have about 3 seconds of stopping writing and it would disappear.
Wow.
And so I would start out by doing that for like a minute, and then I worked up to 3 minutes and then 5 minutes. And then I got to the point where I could do it for 60 minutes, like a flow state. And so 60 minutes of writing at that speed, is like 6,000. I mean, it's a lot of words. It's lots and lots of words. It's sort of books full of words. And so that was practice. But it actually taught me an amazing lesson about writing, which everyone talks about, but putting in practice is a lot harder, which is, I think someone said recently on Substack, write from your heart and edit with your mind. There is that idea. I don't know who said that original quote, but I saw them share it. Maybe they wrote it. It was just a very interesting way to put it, that app, kind of disconnecting your mind and writing from your heart about what you were exploring can be really good practice for doing that. And so I think that once, you do that for a while, you build the confidence that there's a post in there somewhere. You just gotta start typing. It's in there.
That quote feels like the safe for work version of, I think it's Hemingway, who said, write drunk, edit sober.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Oh, and Hemingway would know.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You've got 4 years of content on The Beautiful Mess. You've got many more years on Cuddle.fish. What haven't you talked about yet that you're excited to get into next?
I want to do a deep dive on the finance product overlap, because I think that that's one of the biggest catalysts to get this whole thing going. And we don't talk about it enough, which is basically like at the end of the day, your company's strategy is your budget. It's not really the strategy, but the main implicit beliefs get manifest often as a budget. And so you see teams, for example, come up with an amazing strategy. And then, if you're in an early stage startup, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then, some investor or board member happens to meet one of the founders over coffee one day and gives them an idea. And then suddenly it's this thing, and they've spent money on it, and they've invested some money, and they've kind of locked in money for something. And then you have to do it no matter what the strategy is. It's sort of what you've budgeted and what you've done. So I think that that's like a very interesting overlap. I think it explains why also a lot of these companies want desperately to be more product focused, but can't just get the machinery going. I might do a deep dive on that, where maybe I interview, 50 people or something, and then kind of write a better series on that. Because I think that that's something that's important. I like a change of pace, like talking about dollars and cents would be really interesting at the moment.
So how do you continue to find these new topics? I mean, where do you get your inspiration?
Oh, geez. I mean, there's never ending topics of these things. I think I remember at Amplitude once we tried to map out all the various topics that could exist. And it was, thousands and thousands of, I think I wrote one time, 200 titles that we could just write right now that hadn't been written. It was just a very diverse topic area. And I have these just massive Miro boards of ideas, and I just can go to them. If ever I'm weak on an idea, I just go to the big Miro editorial boards that I write, and I'm just like, well, let's go down into topic land. All these are topics that I happen to be sharing my screen now at the moment. No one can see that who's watching, but I'm just showing topics after topics after topics after topics, topics after topics after topics. At this rate, I can't write all of them. I'll definitely retire or be sitting, I don't know, as a grandparent, assuming my son who's 6 self-motivates in certain directions. But he might not, world might be burning by that point. So
I think that's a great segue into our final question, which I'll let Danielle ask.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue. And then you also mentioned earlier, where is your place of happiness? So the final question is just to get to know our guests a little more. If you could wake up any place tomorrow, where would you choose to go with the day or spend the day?
Wow. Remember, Danielle said something before we started that she did an experiment with her work, and they all asked a somewhat similar question. She said, talk about product management. That she said that. I'm going to try to think of a non-work example. I mean, part of me, my first instinct was like, oh my God, I'd be doing this amazing workshop with a great group of people. Like, that's crazy. Maybe that is my gut answer. Maybe that's, I found my happy path, or like my red thread. I would do nothing. I just want to, maybe right now I'm inclined to just wake up on a beach and do nothing for a day. That would be good. That like nothing in particular, just a day, especially not having to think about product. Yeah, I would find a way to not think about product. Maybe there's, some kava tea or something would do the trick.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on the show. This has been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that went places.
Wow, what a session. That really was amazing. Karl, what are your takeaways?
I completely agree with you. That was an exciting conversation. I'm really glad that we got to have that time to talk to John. That was really quite good. Some of the things that I liked everything that he said, and I don't want to spend all this time basically re-saying everything that you just listened to. But of the kind of key points to bring out, he talked a lot about his background. We asked him a lot of questions about his background, because product management is one of those things that's, I think, it's best performed. And I think that John's experience kind of shows this as well, that it's best performed when it's backed by context and a multitude of little experiences and just the tinkering and things that make up life, all those things that kind of well-round a person. Then they get to a point where they can do product management, as opposed to, say somebody that's fresh out of school and doesn't have all that experience, may not know all the situations as well as somebody who does. He also made the point that there's finding out that there's other people like him, like through his writing, finding that out. But there's a large diversity of folks that we work with, people like him in a lot of different disciplines. His readers aren't all product managers, that come from all over the place, but resonating with things that he writes. He also talked about how success is made up of, context across multiple dimensions, whether that's the norms, environments, tools, the stage of a company, etc. And just that you cannot look at only one metric of success. You have to really look across all these different dimensions to really figure out, do you have success or not? And then also, one thing that I really like about John is just, he is a prolific writer, but that's how he learns. This is how John learns. And that's why his writing is so introspective and not actionable. And he's definitely gotten the feedback, hey, we'd like actionable content, but that's not what he does. His writing is there for him for learning. So Danielle, what did you take away from this?
Yeah, I think same as you. I don't want to repeat the whole episode. Every time we chat to folks, I make notes as we write so that I have these bullets at the end for the wrap up. And I basically just transcribed the whole episode as we were talking through it. So, picking my top ones are really difficult. I loved the phrase that the Instagram version of product management. And because whenever we talk externally about what we do as product managers, we do kind of gloss over some of the difficult bits, whether that's because legally you can't talk about the projects that you're working on, or you just choose not to, or because you choose to put the best version of yourself on the internet. It's so believable on Instagram, and it's a conversation we're surrounded by, especially women in social media, is that, Instagram versus reality. And I just forget that there's LinkedIn versus reality as well. And that detail is sometimes lost. I loved his comment about when you're writing a blog or when you're kind of going through these things, that the bar is being curious enough to throw yourself into it. Like, you have to be curious enough in a subject to truly throw yourself into it, submerge yourself in it, understand it, and then to be curious to write about it, to publish that and share that with other people. I really enjoyed just that phrase, I think it takes some of the pressure off. Like, as long as you're curious about a subject, you don't have to be the subject matter expert. You just have to be curious enough to learn. Loved that. And then I also, because I feel this so truly, that so much of being in product requires and just demands that your self-identity gets wrapped up in being a product person, that you can forget to have fun. Like, it's okay to have fun with being a product person. It doesn't define who you are. You know, if you put a feature out there and it flops, like, okay, great. Did you have fun? Did you learn? Let's move. And it's easy to get caught up in the drama sometimes. So those are my takeaways. Let us know what your takeaways were. What comments really made you think? And what new thoughts did you have listening to this podcast?
Drop us a line at hello@productlyspeaking.com or join the chat on Matrix at #productlyspeaking:/matrix.org. Also, follow our page on LinkedIn to get the latest updates. We'd love to hear from you. This has been Productly Speaking.
Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard, subscribe. Make sure you don't miss any episodes.
Also, share our podcast with your friends and anyone you think might enjoy listening to an American and a Brit natter on about product management.
I don't think you can call it nattering.
I guess actually we did stay on topic and it's not technically nattering.
Exactly. Well, what did you guys think? Leave us some feedback. Make sure to visit us at www.productlyspeaking.com. Send us an email at hello@productlyspeaking.com or join the chat on Matrix at #productlyspeaking:/matrix.org. Thank you all again, and until next time, cheerio.